Right, now that your slab has had some time to sit and dry just a little bit, what we are going to do is we are going to take the rubber kidney and we are going to use the edge to lightly smooth the texture from the slab roller or whatever you may have rolled it out on off of the surface. You want to be careful not to smush your ends down so that they are any skinnier or thinner than the rest of the slab. If there are any air bubbles in your clay, the rubber kidney will help bring them to the surface. So this side looks pretty good to me. I'll carefully flip it over and go ahead and do this side. So this side is very textured, so it's going to take just a little bit longer. Be sure that the texture is completely gone. I'm going to go over my slab in one direction with the rubber kidney, and then I'm going to change and go a different direction, because you don't want any of this texture to show up in your plate. Okay, so I don't know if you guys can see. I'm going to pick it up and see if you can get it a little bit. There's a little bump right here that showed up in the surface of my clay. This is an air bubble. So to get rid of any of the air bubbles that may show up in the surface, you're just going to take your pen tool and you're going to poke into that air bubble. And then you're just going to take your finger and blend that hole back out, so that way you know there's no air bubbles in your slab. All right, next step, you're going to take a pattern and you're going to do a rough cut with this. So you're going to lay your pattern down in the middle of your slab and you're going to cut around the pattern. So you don't want to cut all the way to the edge. You're going to want to cut out just a little bit further. So I'm going to use my knife. This is good for if you have straight edges. Now, if you decide to use the round template, you're going to want to use your pen tool to do your rough cut. So I'm just going to come out here and go about an inch away from the edge and cut off some extra clay. Alright, so now I've gone ahead and I've done my rough cut. I'm just going to take my kidney and rub out the texture from the edges of it that showed up in the surface of my slab. Now I'm going to set this guy off to the side and I'm going to use him just here in a minute. And now I'm going to grab this plaster texture plate. So we have used plaster molds before. We used them when we did our sprig on the side of our pinch pot. So it's the exact same concept. We're going to push clay into the surface of this, smooth it out, and then we're going to pull it off. So I am going to practice before I actually do my plate with just an extra piece of clay that I had from when I did my rough cut. So I'm going to take that and I'm just going to lay it somewhere where I find the pattern interesting. So I'm going to lay it here. And then I'm just going to take my fingers and kind of push it into the pattern a little bit. At this point, I am going to use a roller and I'm going to roll the clay into the mold. I want to be careful that when I'm rolling, I don't push down towards the mold when I get to the edge. You're going to roll, and then when you get to the edge, you're going to pull up. And this will make sure that your mold or your plate doesn't get any skinnier on the edges. So now I'm going to go ahead and I am going to check to see if my clay has picked up the pattern well enough. So some of the texture plates, the pattern isn't as deep and pronounced, so your design won't be, but you should still have a very clear pattern on the other side. So to do this, you are just going to pull up on a corner and kind of peek to see if your design's there or not. So I don't know if you guys can tell, but it's definitely shown up. So I'm going to go ahead and very carefully pull this off. So your clay is at a leather hard stage at this point, so it's more easily cracked. You want to make sure you do that gently. So there is the design, and I'm pretty happy with it. So I'm just going to set this off to the side, and I feel like I'm ready to do my plate. So I'm going to pick up the slab that I have cut earlier and decide which side I want my texture to be on. So if you have any like weird divots or giant cracks or creases that you couldn't get rid of, so like there's a hole here, I probably won't do it on that side. I'll do it on this side because this side seems to be a little smoother. So I'm going to find an area on here that I really like. So again, I really like this kind of diamond shape, so I'm going to keep it. Put my plate down over that. And again, you're going to start off just by kind of pushing your slab into the mold. Now you don't want to push too hard because you want to retain the shape that you've cut. So I want to make sure that this stays as a square or a circle if that's what you chose. So now that I've kind of gotten it all pushed in there pretty easy, I'm going to take my roller again and I'm going to roll starting from the middle outward. So it's a nice clean print of the plaster mold. And now what we are going to do is we are going to cut our plate again, but this time we're going to cut it to template. So you're going to cut it right up against the sides. So I'm just going to make sure my template is where I like it. And you don't want to push this down very hard because you don't want to lose your pattern. So you're just going to nice and easily set it on here, and then you're going to use, again, your knife if you have a square, something with straight edges. If you did a circle, you're going to use your pen tool to do this. But you want to make sure that you hold it directly up and down and not at an angle because we want nice, clean, straight sides. So I'm going to make sure it's straight up and down. I'm just going to pull my knife through the clay. And there is the shape of my plate. So for my next step, in ceramics, you want to make sure that your corners are smooth because after it gets fired, these corners are going to be very sharp and we don't want to cut anybody. So what you're going to do, you're going to make sure your hands are just damp. We don't want them real wet. And then you're going to take your finger and you're going to kind of smooth the edge of your plate down towards your tabletop. I've smoothed all my edges down. Now I'm just going to take my finger and kind of slide it right around the edge. Make sure it's nice and rounded. I'm going to very carefully pick up my plate and flip it over because I'm going to do the same thing to the back side. So there's another sharp edge back here. So I'm going to go ahead and work to get rid of that. You're going to do the same thing. You're going to take your finger and kind of round that clay towards the tabletop. I have some nice smooth edges all the way around. So now my last and final step, I'm going to pick this up, and then we are going to work on smoothing out this really rough edge that has happened. So again, you're just going to make sure your hands stay moist. You don't want them dripping. You just want them to stay wet. You're going to take your finger and you're going to smooth out this edge. So it still should be a rounded edge. I'm rounding all of my edges. There's no sharp points on here. I'm just going to lay it down on the table so I can make sure my sides are nice and straight to move on to the next step. So for the next step of this, you're going to want to use the same cloth that you used to roll your slab with to protect your clothes, and we are going to be using our knee. You're going to lay a cloth over your knee, and then you just want to make sure that all of the wrinkles are smoothed out of it and it's nice and tight. This is just to protect your clothes. So you can do it right over your pants too if you want to, but they may get a little dirty. So you are going to take your new plate and you are going to lay it pattern side down on top of your knee. Okay, so you want the curve of your knee to kind of be in the middle. It's not going to be perfect. And then you are going to use this to tamp or pat a curve into your slab. So this is just a piece of cloth filled with sand. It's called a sandbag. And you're going to hold it by the top to do this. So you're going to start in the middle, and then you're going to gently tap the clay towards the edge. And then you can kind of gradually see that the clay is starting to curve around my knee. Alright, and what you want to do after that, you're going to take it off and you're going to kind of hold it out in front of you on its side like this, so you can see if the curve is the same all the way around. So some of my corners aren't as curved as others, so I'm going to go ahead and put it back on my knee. And that's better. Alright, once you have a nice curve to the side of your plate, what you are going to do is you are going to wad up some paper towel, or in this case, I am just going to use the cloth that I use to protect my knee. I'm going to wad it up, and then I'm going to lay my plate over it so it can retain that nice curved shape as it dries up a little bit. So from this point, you are just going to leave your plate on this paper towel so it can start to dry. Let's smooth out any weird stuff that I see. Now I'm going to go ahead and create a foot. So the foot for my plate is just going to be a coil. So I'm going to use a piece of the clay that I had left from earlier, and I'm just going to start off by pinching it into that kind of coil shape. Now I'm going to make sure I keep my hands nice and wet as I roll my coils. This will prevent them from cracking as easily. And then I'm just going to go ahead and start rolling with just my fingertips. Okay, when you're making your coils, you don't want them to be any bigger than your pinky around. You want to make sure you try and roll your coils evenly so you don't have any thin spots. So now I am going to use it to create the foot for my knee plate. The first thing I am going to do is kind of lay it on my plate and get the size that it's supposed to be. I think that looks pretty good. So I'm going to pull it off. And again, when you're doing a coil foot, you want to make sure you cut your coil where it is double stacked. So I'm going to use my knife and I'm going to cut into my coil at an angle. This will give you a better point to connect your clay at than just two flat edges. So now that I have cut this, I need to lay it back on my plate just to make sure it's the right size. And I'm going to use my pin tool to trace around my coil so I know where I need to score. So I'm going to grab my scoring tool and I'm going to go ahead and work on this part first. So there's that part. So now I'm going to score the ends of my coil, their little feet. And I'm also going to score the side of the coil that is going to be on the plate. So now I'm going to add slip. Remember, you don't want a ton of slip, and you use your floofy brush or your slip brush for this, not your stiff blending brush. I'm going to add some slip directly to the area that I scored on the plate. I'm going to add just a hair to my ring, and then make sure you don't forget to do the ends of your coil. So I'm going to connect those first, push them together. I'm just going to take a second to smooth it out a little bit so I know it's going to hold while I join the coil to the plate. I'm going to put the coil down on the plate and make sure it is still round. So I'm just going to push that down gently. Remember, not too much because you don't want to lose your texture from the other side. And then I am going to use my welding tool, so any of the wooden sticks, and I'm going to blend my edges together. And once you've gone all the way around, you will use your stiff blending brush to help smooth out that bumpy surface. And once you've gotten the outside of your coil done, then you're going to go ahead and do the same thing for the interior of your coil. Now I'm just going to dampen my hands a little bit and use my fingers to smooth everything out. Alright, so that is done. I'm just going to take a moment to make sure that it sits nicely on there. So that does. So I'm going to leave it to dry upside down on my wadded up paper towel. And then you're going to wrap it and you're going to set it on a plastic board. And from this point, we're going to wrap it in a plastic bag and store it until next class.